The explosion was loud enough to shake the ground under my feet. Smoke filled the air and I could barely hear anything except the rush of blood in my ears. "Come on, Tasha," I yelled, holding onto her hand as I pulled her toward the evac point. We did it. The mission's done. Help is on the way. But then the bullet hit her. It was meant for me. "Stay with us, Tasha. Please." Her blood was already soaking into my sleeve. She looked up at me with tired, fading eyes. Her lips moved like she was trying to say something, but I couldn't make out the words. Then her body went limp. She was gone, and I was alone. Again. The scar on my arm hadn't even formed yet, but I felt it burn, as if my skin already knew it would never forget. The mission Operation Thornsand was a success. We shut down a weapons supply route used by terrorists in 3 countries. But there was no record we were ever there. No medals, no headlines, just silence. I kept Tasha's dog tags in my boot for years. That was all I had left. When I came home, there was no welcome, no questions, no recognition. People walked past me like I didn't exist. I had risked everything for a country that didn't even remember my name. Florida hadn't changed. The sun was still blazing and the heat was still peeling the paint off mailboxes like it had always done. The Monroe house looked just like I remembered. The white fence still had the dent from when I crashed my bike at 9. The old porch swing still creaked in the breeze, the same one my siblings and I used to cram onto popsicles melting down our arms. But me, I wasn't the same. I'd left the name Monroe behind somewhere during those secret missions. And yet, when my boots hit the same gravel driveway, my chest tightened like I was opening a letter I'd forgotten existed. It had been over 10 years. No calls, no texts. I had just disappeared. And now, I was back. Not because I missed anyone, but because the ghosts from my past wouldn't leave me alone. No one was waiting at the door. I walked in and smelled lemon cleaner and ham like a family party was happening, one I hadn't been invited to. My mum walked by with a tray of deviled eggs and looked at me like I was just someone passing through. "Oh, you made it," she said. No hug, no smile. That was it. Then came my dad, tall, still built, like the officer he used to be, but with eyes that didn't react to anything anymore. "You're still alive?" he asked like he was reading the weather. "Looks like it," I said with a dry smile that didn't reach my eyes. My old room full of wedding boxes. My brother Nathan, the favourite child. Lieutenant Nathan Monroe was getting married next week. To an Army intelligence officer, of course. I got assigned to sleep in the garage next to Dad's dusty weight bench. At dinner, there was no place set for me. I dragged a folding chair to the end of the table like I didn't belong. Nobody paused when I sat down. Nobody looked at me. My cousin, who I hadn't seen since braces, leaned over and said, "So you still do yoga or whatever?" I smiled like it didn't hurt. Like the years away hadn't cost me everything. In the dining room there was a wall of honour. Photos of Nathan in uniform. Dad during his command years. Even Mum in a medic's vest. Nothing of me, not even my high school graduation photo. I hadn't just been forgotten. I'd been erased. Maybe that's what serving your country really meant. Giving up your name, your face, your place at the table. Back in the garage, I sat alone and slipped on my old comms earpiece just habit. That's when I heard it. A podcast was playing through a secure satellite channel. Someone asked, "So what about your sister Sophia? Didn't she serve too?" And I heard Nathan laugh. "Actually, laugh, Sophia," he said. "I don't think she was ever really a soldier. She quit, didn't finish anything. Disappeared, actually." I sat there in silence. Not broken. Just still. That's what betrayal feels like when it comes from someone who shared your childhood. It's not loud. It's quiet. It sinks in slow like a cold wind. He didn't know I was listening. Maybe that's what made it worse. Or maybe that's what made it honest, that in his story, I was always the dropout, the ghost. I looked at the scar on my arm, the one that still aches when it rains. Then I reached for the encrypted device hidden inside the lining of my old duffel bag. A red alert flashed across the screen. Storm hatch files accessed. Unauthorized ID N. Monroe. Protocol breach detected. I stared at it. I had buried the truth for 15 years. Kept it so deep I barely recognized myself. But now my brother had stirred it up and the past was crawling back to the surface. And this time, I wasn't going to let it sink again. I waited until the house was dark, until the last light in the hallway went out and the silence felt heavy enough to breathe. Then I pulled the encrypted device from the lining of my duffel and flipped it open. My fingers knew the sequence without thinking. Muscle memory from a life nobody here believed I'd lived. The screen lit up with a soft green glow and then red. A warning flashing like a quiet scream, storm hatch files. Accessed. Unauthorized ID N. Monroe. My heart didn't race. It dropped. Like a stone. Nathan. My brother. The one with the polished medals and the perfect record. The one everyone toasted at dinner while I sat in a garage. He had accessed a classified file that should have been buried forever. Not just any file storm hatch. That was my op, my team, my call signs, my responsibility. I pulled up the logs, timestamps, coordinates. The signature key matched the system issued to Army Intel, his fiancée's department. So either he went through her or she helped him do it. I followed the trail deeper. Every step I took through the log history felt like pulling thread from a sweater I'd spent years trying not to unravel. It wasn't just a casual look. Nathan had copied data, he'd decrypted it, he'd opened names. My name. That file had been sealed under a layered blackout for 15 years. Only 4 people in the entire defense structure even knew it existed. And now it was lit up on some unsecured military podcast stream. That wasn't a mistake. That was a message. I traced the breach protocol deeper, and my stomach tightened. The breach had triggered a cascade. Security systems had auto-flagged my aliases' names I'd used during covert deployments IDs I thought were dead. But now they were all active again. My covers were unraveling. If someone out there knew what to look for, they could find me. And worse, they could find the others. People who never asked to be remembered. People who were meant to stay in the dark. I sat back trying to think, trying not to feel, but the weight in my chest didn't care. All it took was one careless move, one act of ego from a man who wanted to prove something, and the ghosts I'd buried were now at risk. My team, my past, my name. I stared at Nathan's name on the screen and felt something I didn't want to name. It wasn't just betrayal, it was personal. This wasn't about family. It was about territory, power, maybe envy, maybe revenge. I didn't know. What I did know was this: the person I used to be, commander of a black ops unit trained for no-credit missions, was being dragged out of the shadows. And I couldn't let that happen without a fight. I closed the device and looked around the garage. Dust on everything. A spider web in the corner of the window. The past clinging to the walls like smoke. I hadn't come back to stir anything up. But now that it was in motion, I couldn't walk away. I pulled out the fireproof bag I always kept close and slid the device back in. I tucked it under the bench press behind an old toolbox. Then I sat down on the bench and took a deep breath. The kind you take before a mission. The kind that tells your body, this isn't over. I remembered something Tasha used to say: before every op ghost, don't rest, they just wait. Well, the ghosts were wide awake now. In the morning, I walked into the kitchen like nothing was wrong. Nathan was already there drinking coffee from a mug that said, "World's okayest brother." I poured myself some water. "Sleep okay in the garage?" he asked without looking up. I gave a small smile. "Like a rock," I said. His fiancée Clara came in a few minutes later, sharp, polished army intel to the bone. She nodded at me like I was part of the furniture. I watched them talk, laugh, plan their wedding over toast and eggs, like there wasn't a breach notification glowing red in the back of my mind. Like he hadn't poked a classified operation with a stick just to see what might crawl out. And maybe that's what burned most. The ease, the casualness, as if none of it mattered. But it did. It mattered to the people I'd lost, to the secrets I'd sworn to protect, to the girl I used to be who once believed that doing the right thing would earn a place at the table. I rinsed my glass, nodded politely, and went back to the garage. I needed a plan. Because now that Nathan had opened that door, whatever came through it, I had to be ready. I went back inside, quiet as a shadow, and stood in front of the family's wall of honour. It was just outside the dining room, across from the hallway mirror. I'd walked past it 100 times as a kid, back when I used to believe I'd earn a place there too, someday. The wall hadn't changed much, just a few more medals, a couple of polished new frames. Nathan's face smiled from 3 different photos in uniform. Dad, younger and harder, stood proud in a framed picture from his command days. Even Mom had a spot her in fatigues and a medic vest, probably from some deployment in her 20s. But there was nothing of me, not even the class photo from my high school graduation. It was like I'd never existed, like I'd been cut out clean. No name, no frame, no space held for me. I stared at that wall until it stopped looking like wood and pictures and started looking like a message. You weren't one of us. You never were. I sat down in the hallway, my back against the opposite wall, legs stretched out, just breathing, just being still. My fingertips found the edge of the scar on my forearm again, a habit. It was thick and uneven, a little raised. The only proof I had that it all really happened. And suddenly, without even meaning to my mind, went back to Storm Hatch. There were 6 of us, all women, all SEALs. We were tasked with dismantling a financial hub, funneling millions into extremist cells across 3 continents. Not a single photo was ever taken. Not a single file survived with our names. The operation didn't just need to be successful, it needed to disappear. Officially, Storm Hatch never happened. But I remember everything. We parachuted into enemy territory under full moonlight, landed in silence on the rooftop of a building that looked like a half-collapsed school. It wasn't, though. It was a front, the central hub of an illegal funding network, posing as a war relief NGO. We took that building and held it for 12 days. 12. No air support, no reinforcements, just us. Our mission was to extract intel, disable the mainframe, and vanish without a trace. We had to split into pairs to cover all zones. Tasha and I got the West Wing, a ruined library full of broken desks and mouldy textbooks. She used to make jokes to keep the fear off, said the place smelled like her first dorm room. She had this laugh, sharp, fast, always louder than she meant it to be. It made the dark feel less dark. On day 9, we were hit hard. They found us. I remember holding position behind what used to be a chemistry lab table, returning fire, and praying someone was watching the hallway. Tasha was. She always was. I remember her dragging a wounded girl into cover, local, maybe 12 years old, probably used by the enemy as bait. Tasha didn't hesitate. She got her to safety. She took a round in the shoulder for it. She bled through 3 layers of tactical gear and still covered me until we could fall back. I remember trying to stitch her up with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. She kept telling me, "We're ghosts, Sophia. We don't get graves, we get stories." When we finally extracted on day 12, we left nothing behind. Not the girl, not a trace. Intel was burned, devices wiped, building blown. All of us disappeared into the system like smoke. And then the silence started. No medals, no ceremony, not even a nod from the people we risked everything for. It was like we'd never happened. And maybe that's why the wall back home had no place for me. Not because they forgot, but because there was nothing to remember. No record, no headline, just whispers. But I remembered. I remembered everything. The heat, the dust, the blood, the weight of a rifle that never left your hands, the way your body aches when you haven't slept in 3 days but you still have to run. I remembered the girl Tasha saved. I remembered the coordinates. I remembered what we stood for. We weren't invisible. We were erased. And I made myself a promise right there, in that hallway, staring at a wall full of everyone else's truth. I would not let history be rewritten by people who weren't there. I would not let them turn ghosts into myths just to protect someone else's story. Nathan opened the wrong file, but in doing that, he lit a fuse I thought had burned out a long time ago. Now, it was burning again, fast hot, and heading straight for everything I'd once buried. And if the truth had to claw its way through concrete and silence, then so be it. I'd been invisible long enough. The next move wasn't about revenge. It was about memory, about honour, about putting Tasha back where she belonged, not in my nightmares, but in the record. That thought still echoed in my mind as I stood at the edge of my brother's engagement party, a glass of sparkling water in my hand, the only thing I trusted in a house that no longer felt like mine. The backyard had been decorated with string lights and pastel tablecloths. Music played softly from a Bluetooth speaker, hidden behind some potted palms. People I barely recognised floated by, holding cocktails and complimenting each other's shoes, pretending the world wasn't full of things they didn't understand. Clara looked perfect, as if she had stepped out of a recruitment ad for Army intelligence. Her uniform skirt was replaced by a pale blue sundress, but her spine was still straight as a salute. Nathan was in his best dress shirt, the kind he only wore when cameras were involved. And me, I was the shadow, at the edge of the photo, the unnamed guest. I stayed near the drinks table, out of the way, blending in like a coat draped over a chair. Every now and then, someone would glance at me and smile politely, then look away. No one asked who I was. No one asked why I hadn't RSVP'd. I was the sibling they didn't talk about. The empty seat at every holiday. I was used to it, but I wasn't prepared for what came next. The buzz of small talk grew louder as a black SUV pulled up to the curb. Doors opened. Boots hit pavement. A man in uniform walked up the driveway with purpose, silver hair, broad shoulders, medals that didn't beg for attention but earned it anyway. People turned. Conversations paused. I set down my drink. Colonel Ramirez. He had been my superior officer once, a legend in his own right, the kind of man who didn't waste words. He wasn't supposed to be here, not unless Nathan had pulled strings, maybe hoping for an endorsement, a nod from the brass. The colonel scanned the crowd with eyes that didn't miss much. Then he saw me. He stopped mid-step. The noise fell away like someone had turned the volume knob to 0. My mother, who had been showing someone a photo on her phone, let the device slip from her hand and hit the patio bricks with a crack. Nathan froze. Clara went pale. And Colonel Ramirez, a man who had led black ops teams into territories, no map dared mark, straightened his posture and looked directly at me. Then he saluted. "Ma'am," he said loud enough for every guest to hear. "SEAL, Commander." The words cut through the backyard like a blade. No music, no chatter, just stunned silence. The kind that doesn't ask for answers because it already knows. I didn't move, not right away. My breath caught somewhere between memory and pride. Finally, I nodded once. Simple, clean. No denial, no speech. Just a quiet confirmation that some truths didn't need permission to exist. Ramirez held my gaze for a moment longer, then walked on as if the entire moment had never happened. But it had. Oh, it had, and the people who mattered most had seen it. I turned, slightly caught the look in Nathan's eyes, disbelief, anger, maybe even fear. He looked like someone who'd just realised the story he'd been telling wasn't the whole story, that his version of me, the quitter, the dropout, the ghost didn't match the one now standing in his backyard, being addressed like a legend. My mother didn't speak. She bent down, slowly picked up her cracked phone and walked inside. Clara stood there stiff, as if trying to process whether this moment was real or some misunderstanding. But deep down, I think she knew. People like her always knew how to read power when it walked in, even if it came dressed in quiet. The rest of the evening blurred. People talked around me, not to me. Some offered cautious smiles, others avoided eye contact. Nathan didn't approach, neither did Clara. Ramirez never brought it up again, but the seed had been planted, and nothing kills a false narrative faster than the truth whispered in front of witnesses. Later that night, back in the garage, I stared at the ceiling and let the silence settle. But it was different now. Not the kind that erased, the kind that made room. Ramirez had cracked something open, not just in them, but in me. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a shadow. I felt seen, but I also felt exposed. And in this line of work, in any version of the work I'd done, being seen always came with a cost. I slipped out of the party early before the music got loud enough to drown the questions. Drove across town in silence, headlights flickering against palm trees, and familiar intersections that hadn't changed since high school. The base lodging hadn't changed much either, sterile walls, buzzing lights, and a kind of quiet that always felt like waiting. I keyed open the door to my room, kicked off my boots, and powered up my old laptop. Within seconds, the screen lit up red. Breach detected, level critical, storm hatch, records deletion in progress. I froze. It wasn't just unauthorized access. This was active deletion. Someone was trying to wipe the whole operation clean off the map. Not redact, not review, erase, gone like it never happened. I opened the logs, traced the commands. The request came from someone using an override code linked to the Department of Defense. But the access trail didn't end there. The real trigger had come from a name I hadn't seen in years, Senator Ledlow. Ledlow had made a career out of undermining women in combat roles, claimed integration was a PR stunt. Now he had a leak, one fragment of one operation torn from context, and he was using it to launch a full investigation. A public inquiry designed not to seek truth, but to reinforce bias. The narrative had already been written. Storm Hatch was a disaster. The fact that 6 women ran it, convenient evidence. I leaned forward, heart steady but jaw clenched. If they succeeded, Storm Hatch would become a cautionary tale, not a milestone. The mission where we shut down a terrorist financial hub gone. The school we held for 12 days without support, never documented. Tasha's sacrifice reduced to a mistake on paper. We weren't just being erased, we were being rewritten. I opened my backup system, tapped into a shadow server I'd built off-grid years ago, hidden under layers of misdirection. One by one, I started pulling files, metadata, after-action reports, encrypted audio logs. I rebuilt what they were trying to destroy. Then, I did something I hadn't done in 15 years. I opened the helmet cam footage from Tasha. The video was glitchy, half-pixelated, filled with static, but the audio was clear. Her voice rang out through the speakers, target neutralized Commander Bennett. Confirm extraction protocol. And then my voice tight and fast. Tasha, fall back. Fall back, now. Then a silence followed by her last whisper, we did it. I sat there not blinking, not breathing. Then I saved the file again and again. I sent copies to multiple secure endpoints, embedded inside innocuous data files. I wrote a message to Ramirez with everything I'd uncovered that breached the center's involvement, the potential blowback, attached the footage, tagged it for eyes-only review, then hit send. Still, the system alert kept blinking. Whoever was doing this wasn't backing down. They were scrubbing deep backups, black box logs, even mission credential chains. They wanted Storm Hatch gone in every way that mattered. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I opened a second terminal, built a redundancy script, loaded it with comms logs, evac orders, classified coordinates, everything that made the mission real. Then I handwrote a note, addressed only to Tasha's mother. It said, "Your daughter saved lives. Her story matters. They don't want you to know. But I'll make sure you do." By 4:30 a.m, I had every fail-safe in place. If anything happened to me, if they shut me down, if I went dark, the archive would go live. Not to the media, to people who'd understand. Soldiers, journalists who knew what this world really cost. I looked at the scar on my arm, thought about what it meant to carry a truth that no one wanted to hear, thought about the girl we pulled from that school. She was probably in college now, maybe writing papers about justice. She'd never know we'd saved her. That was okay, but no one was going to say we didn't matter. I shut the laptop, sat back in the dark. "Try to erase us," I whispered, "and I'll make us unforgettable." The moon was low and round by the time I reached the beach. The waves whispered against the shore, quiet and steady, like they'd always done when we were kids. It was where we built forts out of driftwood and buried time capsules we never meant to dig up. That night, it was where I decided the next war I'd fight wouldn't be in a desert, but right here on home soil and with my own blood. Nathan was already there, standing at the tide's edge, hands in his pockets, back stiff with guilt. I didn't speak at first. I just stood beside him, the salt air cool against my face. Then I held out the drive. "You did this," I said flatly. "Do you know how many people you just tried to erase with one click?" He turned to me, startled. "Sophia! I didn't mean to." "You didn't mean to," I cut him off. "That's the problem. You never meant to. You didn't mean to forget me. Didn't mean to ignore the missions I led, the lives we saved. You just did. Because it was easier. I thought I was helping," he said weakly. "I'm writing my thesis on women in covert operations. I thought if I could use some classified examples." "Use," I said, voice sharp. "Nathan, you didn't use a case study. You broke into a locked vault and handed our ghost to a man who wants us buried for good." He swallowed hard, clearly shaken. I didn't know it was that serious. I looked him dead in the eye. "You handed Senator Ledlow the key to erasing everything Storm Hatch ever accomplished." Tasha. Me. The women who held that school with nothing but grit and shrapnel. You made us a footnote in someone else's agenda. He looked down at the drive in his hands like it had grown fangs. "I just wanted to show people the truth." "That's not truth," I said. "That's theft. You took something that wasn't yours to share. You clicked on a history I bled for and then laughed about it on a podcast like I never mattered." His voice broke. "I didn't know it hurt that much." "You didn't care to ask," I said quietly. "Not once. Not in 15 years. I turned my back to the water and stepped closer. "Do you even understand what you almost destroyed? The school, Nathan, the children, the reports, the bodies we carried out. You didn't just risk my legacy. You endangered a truth bigger than both of us." He stood in silence, eyes glistening, then pulled something from his pocket, a small crinkled photo. "I kept this," he whispered. "Your graduation. I thought maybe one day you'd come back for it." "I'm not here for that," I said. "I'm here because I can't let you write me out of my own story." I handed him the drive again. "This isn't just data, it's everything. Every scream we didn't have time to feel, every sacrifice Tasha made, Every second I carried us all without a name or a medal. If you're going to hold it, feel the weight. He took it, carefully, respectfully this time. Is it too late, he asked, to be part of it? I looked at him. My brother, my betrayer, my past. It's not about being part of it, I said. It's about not being the reason it disappears. A long pause settled between us, filled with the sound of the sea and 100 unsaid things. I want to fix it, he said. Just tell me what to do. Start by listening, I said, and then, maybe help me tell the truth the way it was meant to be told. Not polished, not easy, but real. He nodded slow and unsure, like a man stepping into cold water. You'll keep me updated. I'll let you know what you need to know, I said. Nothing more. We stood side by side as the tide rolled in. I didn't forgive him. Not yet. But I saw something in him I hadn't seen in years. Readiness. Not to be a hero, but to finally grow up. And for now, that was enough. Just 2 days later, I was summoned back to base. Operation Nightshade, new mission, higher stakes. The briefing room was full of fresh faces, men and women in crisp navy garb, half my age, eager but untested. I hadn't worn my uniform publicly in over 15 years, but as I stepped in silence, fell. Not out of respect, more like confusion. Lieutenant Derek Vance stood by the front row, tall, young, decorated public affairs type, with that confident smirk of someone who's already won before the fight began. He didn't salute, I noticed that. Didn't even nod. He looked at me like I was a relic they've been forced to unearth. Colonel Hall, the man who had once publicly questioned Storm Hatch's credibility, sits at the head table. I spotted him instantly. He's older now, greyer, but the eyes are the same. Sharp, calculating. No medals displayed, but the weight of command is about him in every posture. He had to be behind this, all the pieces fit too neatly. Commander Bennett Hall said without rising, his voice smooth, respectful but cold. Welcome back. We're pleased to have you join Operation Nightshade. Pleased, the word rolled off his tongue like he was delivering bad news. I took my seat at the table of leaders and glanced at Vance. He stiffened. Good. They both know I will command here. I'm not a placeholder. I'm not an icon. I'm the one who put the mission together. We received our briefing Nightshade targets, a web of terror networks, coordinating attacks near US assets in the Middle East. Fast timer. We had 2 weeks to infiltrate, assess, neutralize. Complex. No political heat, no press. Precision only. I nodded at the intel. I knew the data. It didn't flinch. Then came the shake-up they assigned me to lead a mixed-gender SEAL team. 2 women, 3 men, a blend of specialties. But every question I asked was met with a pause. Not a refusal, but a hesitation. Not about capability. More like suspicion. I caught Vance taking in my team selection. One of the 2 women was tech-savvy. The other was older and quiet. He leaned toward her during the break and whispered, "We get to pick our own commander." I heard it. I saw the disdain. Hall, on the other hand, lectured me on unnecessary risks notes about chain of command and image. He lingered on the word. I read between lines. If the op fails, he can place the blame on me. If we succeed, he'll try to claim credit. We began prep intent simulations, terrain maps, infiltration routes, and Hall was everywhere, not giving orders, but rewriting my directives as suggestions, voicing that access codes might not be secure, that intel is rough, that I may want to reconsider routes. Slowly seeding doubt. One evening, during a live-fire practice drill, something exploded wrong. Vance hesitated mid-dance, which I called, and chaos exploded. He violated protocols I had set. Squad was disoriented. Hull stepped in right then and said, "Commander, maybe we should let Vance lead that portion." The message was clear: replace her. Later, I broke formation and looked Hull in the eyes. Sir, I designed it this way for a reason. The timeline is non-negotiable. He nodded, cool as ice. I just don't want us to lose good men. Translation: I don't trust you to keep them alive. I left the range that night, heart hammering. The team is watching. If I falter now, the whispers will become roars. Hull's undermining, Vance's doubt. The room is fractured before boots hit ground. I couldn't let this stand. Not for Tasha, not for the team. I called Ramirez. We met in his office, late lights dim. I showed him the drill data, the logs from the exercise Hull's memos flagged. He's setting me up, I said. If Nightshade goes sideways, so will Storm Hatch. They're using the same playbook. Ramirez studied me calm. Then he nodded. Let's bring in oversight. Quietly, he's in. Next morning, I skipped the squad. Visited my mixed team alone, face to face. I told them what was happening, apologized for being part of this chain, and asked for their trust again. One by one, they responded. We're with you, was the answer. Not by order, but by choice. A plan formed. We would adjust the next mission drill ourselves. We'd use their routes, but adapt with extra security nets. We'd record it, gather the data. Then we'd finish the training with a flawless run. Then I'd approach Hull and ask him to ride it with me, and suggest to the brass to put a confidence vote on whether I stay in command. They'd already have the proof, our proof. Back in my quarters, I encrypted the drill footage and data logs to the shadow server. Secure enough to survive an internal audit. Backed up twice. That night, I slept for the first time in days. Not in doubt, in preparation. Operation Nightshade would be my test. Not only to survive external dangers, but to survive internal sabotage. Hull wants relics to stay relics. Vance thinks the old ways are dead. The squad is watching who I turn out to be. I won't let them down. The next day, we headed into the training simulator, a mock urban compound rigged with timers, smoke grenades, and live fire. I briefed the squad in our makeshift war room. We move in clear 3 zones, shut down the primary threat, and exfil by route Delta. Stay sharp, follow orders. The faces around the table were intent. They'd seen Ramirez's backing. They wanted to trust me. But I could feel Hull's eyes in the room, tucked behind that polite facade. He was waiting. The simulator lights dropped. A countdown began. We moved in my team close behind me. Breaching the first door was textbook. We cleared the hallway, downed the first enemy. Then we reached the stairwell, and Vance froze. Not hesitated, froze. Vance, I whispered in comms. Now. Nothing. Smoke. Flash. A second breach behind us. I heard a shout. Commander Civilian, and Vance finally moved. We got the target, but 2 team members got flashbanged, disoriented. The drill ended. Red lights blinked. We'd failed. Back at base, Hull spoke with the brass. I didn't hear much, just echoes that moment of hesitation, Commander Bennett's past questions about mental resilience under fire. The implication was clear that hesitation when Vance delayed was my responsibility. I was too old, too cautious. I'd let doubt seep in, and if I'd hesitated before, in Storm Hatch, that shadow hung over me. That night, I lay awake fighting memory. The risk of letting ghosts of Storm Hatch get in the way. My heart pounded as I relived the moment in the ruined schoolyard, 12 days under siege. Tasha, dying. The child in the hallway. I felt her warmth, clutching my jacket. I heard her cough, saw her eyes full of fear. The lab building collapsing around us. And then that split-second decision to go after the child, first giving me seconds to shield her seconds. Tasha used to protect us. Tasha's round, her sacrifice. My delayed response, meant to save a child, had doomed her. That moment came crashing back. Vance's hesitation in training wasn't the same, but echoes triggered questions. Would I freeze again? Or was I still worthy? Next morning, I addressed the squad in formation. Yesterday showed a weak link. It wasn't equipment. It wasn't protocol. It was trust. And right now, that trust is fractured. I paused. So, here's what we're going to do. We'll run the same compound. But Vance and I will lead the entry together. I want to see whether the hesitation grows or whether we can clear it. The room was silent, waiting. Training started again. Tense, precise. We moved in breach room 1 clear. Stairwell entry. Vance and I side by side. Flashbang's movement controlled sweeps. We hit the second zone and took down the threat. No hesitation. Clear, he whispered. The final zone success. The red alert never lit. The drill ended clean. No flashbacks, just execution. Afterward, I turned to Hull, who was standing nearby with a clipboard. He nodded slight but there. Not praise, but acknowledgement. I searched his face. No celebration, but no edge either. He'd waited for me to break. Instead, I broke the cycle. Vance approached me, eyes cleared. Sorry, he said quietly. I hesitated because I didn't want you to sacrifice anyone for my mistake. I nodded. Thank you for moving. That evening, I pulled Hull aside in private. You pushed this too far, I said calmly. I get questioning chain of command, but using a training drill to question my loyalty, that's beyond protocol. He didn't get angry. He didn't apologize. He just replied slowly, I'm protecting lives. I answered, protecting them is what I do. Listen to the squad, they followed me today. That's not weakness. He studied me, then turned and walked away. The old guard had either accepted this moment or decided moving on was easier than fighting a living picture of Storm Hatch. When I returned to the barracks, the team was talking quietly, but not avoiding me. They were respectful, trustful. We weren't fully healed yet, but we'd tasted alignment. I sent the drill file, the recorded data, to Ramirez's secure link proof of cohesion of competence. As I lay in bed that night, I closed my eyes and remembered Tasha's voice. We're ghosts, Sophia. We don't get graves. We get stories. I understood now, you don't hold a legend by denying history. You hold it by living the next chapter. Days later, we deployed for Operation Nightshade in Yemen. The region was a ghost town of rock and sand villages abandoned and walls riddled with bullet holes. Our objective, a suspected terrorist command hub buried inside a civilian-built compound. We landed at first light, the desert sky pink against dust. I led the Northern Breach team. Vance headed the other entry. We moved through the narrow alleys mapped out by intel. I peered at the coordinates again. Something gnawed at me. The angles were slightly off the entry point, too close to civilian houses. My gut tightened, but I pushed it down and signalled the push. First shot rang out before we hit the courtyard. Kidnapped local militia burst from rooftops, the air filled with gasoline smell and gunfire. We took cover. Then the alarm. The compound was rigged. We were walking into a killing field. That moment, I saw Hull's face flash in my mind, his soft smile during the briefing. He didn't want me to fail. He wanted me to fall. My radio chirped. Commander wounded in Sector 3. That was Vance's voice. The strain was clear. My blood froze. Vance had been shot while trying to cover a breach from the east wall. I didn't wait. I screamed at the team, "Cover me," and sprinted through broken concrete past burning cars and dove into the alley Vance had been trapped in. Debris rained down. I dragged him free, boots smashed and bleeding. I looked at his face. "You good," he groaned. "You're coming with me," I said. "We're not leaving anyone." I kept checking over my shoulder, snipers' ambushes, nearby civilians. Not my fight. We fought our way back toward the center of the courtyard, where the command hub entrance was sealed with concrete slabs and fiber optic cables. Then I saw it a hatch, a small reinforced door I'd never briefed on. I pried it open. Inside was a tunnel, dark, narrow, cold. A timer ticked down from 5 minutes, and beneath it, a bomb taped to a comms relay. This wasn't part of intel. This was sabotage. Someone planted this to blow us up and blame the delay on deception. It had to be Hall. He wanted me dead. "You secure our exit," I told Vance. "I'll handle this." He nodded, pulling his sidearm. I stripped wires, dodging shrapnel triggers and motion sensors. The timer flashed 2:13. I heard static in my earpiece, a recording I had buried from Storm Hatch. Tasha's voice broke through. "Override confirmed, Commander Bennett." My blood ran cold. It signaled authorization codes only I knew. And it triggered something, hear this bomb hooked into the same protocol. This was no accident. This compound systems had been rewritten to recognize me, to protect me. So sabotage would cause a containment failure that kills everyone except me, makes me responsible. I took a deep breath. This was my moment. I knew exactly what to do. "Cut the red wire first," I whispered to no one. My hands shook, but I was precise. I cut red, then yellow. The timer flashed 0:45. I pulled the green wire, then black, but the alarm still screamed 00:05. I yanked the master switch hidden beneath the casing. Everything went dark. The bomb didn't explode. I slumped against the tunnel wall. Vance appeared at the hatch. "You okay?" he asked. I exhaled. "I am." He helped me out. We hauled the injured team back to the extraction zone. Rescue helicopters landed behind us as insurgents retreated. We watched them take off into the sky, my vision blurred with relief and rage. Later in the field debrief, Hull asked how Vance was. I answered calm thin. Alive, because Commander Bennett made it so. Vance gave me a nod across the room. Maybe he believed. Maybe he was starting to see who I was. But Hull's smile still sat on his face after. That night, I downloaded the bomb diagnostics. Back at my station, the metadata pointed straight to Hull, overriding logs, phantom entries, hidden admin privileges. He rigged the map, the bomb, the narrative. He wanted Nightshade to fail and me to die. I compiled it, all maps, logs, command override codes, Tasha's voice file embedded for proof. I sent it to Ramirez and stored a copy in my shadow archive. I stared at the screen. Hull had tried to bury me again. Literally. I closed the laptop and pressed my palm to the screen. "You're done." The next morning, we submitted a full mission report, every log, every map, every audio clip from the Yemen op. Vance stood by my side as second in command, and when I hit send, I felt the weight of years finally lift. 5 days later, the briefing came, a Pentagon-level hearing. Operation Nightshade's integrity was in question, and my findings had triggered a formal investigation. We were ordered to appear at the Pentagon in full uniform, my first time back in dress blues since Storm Hatch. I stood in the uniform shop and buttoned it carefully, feeling the fabric settle over skin that had worn sweat-soaked gear for years. The medals were blank on the chest, but I wore the patches of my unit, and beneath them I felt something else, truth. In the hearing room, I faced a panel of senior officers, lawmakers, and legal counsels. My squad members each signed affidavits sat behind me. Vance's presence was steady. His eyes told the story he didn't have to say aloud he believed. Then Harper walked in, Nathan's fiancée, now fully on Sophia's side. She carried a sealed envelope. She took the podium, introduced herself as Lieutenant Harper Monroe, Army Intelligence. She opened the envelope, inserted a secure drive into the panel's reader, and pushed play. The room went silent as Hull's override logs appeared, followed by bomb diagnostics and the hidden map warnings. Then Tasha's audio clip, override confirmed. Commander Bennett. My hands pressed together at my waist, still there trembling. Each panelist leaned forward, frowning. Hull turned pale. He stammered, there must be an error. But there were no errors. The data fit too cleanly, too intentionally. The sabotage, the ambush, the mapping diversion all pointed to him. The board chairman spoke Colonel Hall. Effective immediately, you are relieved of command pending review. He swiveled to me. Commander Bennett, you will remain in position pending further order of the Secretary. Your actions are under commendation review. Uniformed personnel around me stood and saluted. Vance's silent salute caught my eye. I nodded. Harper stepped into the spotlight again and concluded, we did not just stop a terrorist network. We defended the integrity of our operations, our trust, our history. Commander Bennett ensured the truth was preserved. That evening, after the hearing, I left the Pentagon in uniform, walked through the twilight-lit corridor and down the steps to the plaza below. Reporters clustered, a mic thrust at my face. Commander Bennett, are you reinstated? Will Storm Hatch be declassified? I paused and looked at them genuinely. Storm Hatch has never needed me to speak for it, I said softly. Now it has space to speak for itself. Then I walked on. A week later, the Pentagon released an update. My service record was updated medals, awarded mission acknowledged full, clearance restored. Storm Hatch was officially recognised as an active operation, not a ghost file. My name was included, not erased, not hidden. There was nothing secret national security in the announcement, just the truth. Later, I attended a celebration with my squad and Harper. We laughed, tears in our eyes. Vance shook my hand. Welcome back, Commander, he said. I smiled, feeling it. Setting roots in the uniform I'd earned but never had. We placed a framed certificate together on the wall of a local military community centre. It read Storm Hatch, Operation Recognised, April 2025. My name and the names of the 5 other SEALs on the team immortalised in ink. Tasha's name too. I pressed my hand against the glass and felt her presence not a ghost, but a guardian. That night, I sat at home in my own room, one of the rooms in the base lodging, but it felt more like a real space. My phone buzzed. A text from Nathan. I'm proud of you. Thank you for not giving up. I'll make sure your story gets told right. I replied, let's tell it together. I placed the secure backup, everything in a locked vault. Then I pulled out a dog tag I'd kept hidden for years. I tapped it on the desk. It was mine to wear, mine to share. I clipped it to my uniform the next morning, no discipline, no question. My full name embossed. Storm Hatch became more than a file. It became history. It became proof that we existed, that we mattered, and I became visible. Back in uniform, back in records, back where I belonged. 2 weeks later, a small ceremony was held at the local community hall, a modest place with wooden beams, old folding chairs, and an American flag faded from years of sun. It wasn't grandeur that made it sacred. It was the people inside it. Nathan stood at the podium. His face was calm, his posture straight, but his fingers gripped the edge like it anchored him. He looked across the room and then down at me sitting in the front row in full dress uniform. For years, he began voice steady. I thought my sister had disappeared because she quit, that she walked away from the uniform from us. I never asked why. I never thought I needed to. He paused, eyes tightening. I was wrong. Sophia didn't quit. She carried something bigger than I could ever imagine, and she carried it alone. Behind him, the screen flickered. An image of me caked in sand and sweat eyes locked ahead with defiance, and duty filled the frame. No caption. Just a single line below. Not every hero is in the frame. Some are the frame itself. I felt something break inside me, something hard and old. A silence I had lived in for too long finally cracked open. The room held its breath. My mother, seated beside me, dropped her handkerchief, tears streaming freely. My father, ever the stone pillar, stood and quietly saluted. No words, just a trembling lower lip and a single nod. After the ceremony, people came forward. One woman held her daughter's hand and said, "You saved my niece in Yemen. She told us about the commander who carried her through fire. I had no idea who the girl was, but I smiled and said I was just doing my job." A boy, no older than 10, approached me wearing a toy seal cap. "Are you really a commander?" he asked wide-eyed. "I was," I said softly, kneeling to meet his eyes. "And you can be too. Just remember, being strong means protecting people even when no one sees you do it." He nodded, solemn as a soldier. Nathan stood beside me, watching all of this unfold. "It's funny," he whispered. "I spent years trying to be the perfect son. Turns out the hero in the family was just busy saving the world." The wall of faces was unveiled after the ceremony. My photo stood at the centre, flanked by others, teachers, EMTs, soldiers, even a firefighter who died in a flood rescue. My frame was simple, no medals, no stats, just my name, Commander Sophia Bennett, and that same line. Some are the frame itself. I touched the glass. My reflection layered with the old image behind it, past and present colliding. For a moment I heard Tasha's voice. Not clearly, just a trace of it, like wind slipping through an open window. "We didn't do it for glory," she had once said. "We did it to give them a world where they didn't need to know our names." I whispered back, "I know, but they'll know yours now." My mother came up behind me and placed her hand gently on my back. "I should have asked how you made it back," she said, eyes red. "Not why you left. I didn't even know how to tell you," I said. "You don't have to. You're here." Later, we took a photo together in front of the wall. Me, Nathan, Mom and Dad. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. A beginning. That night, as I folded my uniform with care, I slipped into an old sweatshirt and pulled out a thin ribbon from my drawer, the red wire I'd clipped from a bomb in Yemen. I wound it into a small loop and pinned it beside Tasha's dog tags. A reminder, a promise. I had been invisible once. Now I was part of something again. Not just history, but legacy. I walked back into the hall that afternoon, not as a guest, not as a whisper, but as someone whose story had finally been allowed to speak. The wall of honour stood at the far end, bathed in soft golden light, filtering through stained glass panels that threw fractured colours onto the floor. It had changed. Just enough. A new frame had been added. Simple. Matte. Black. Centred between Nathan's silver-framed portrait and Dad's sun-washed command photo. And in it, me, caught mid-stride hair pulled back. Boots, grounded uniform sharp. No medals, no digital enhancements. Just me, the way it was. Real. I stopped 3 feet away, the breath in my chest suddenly thick, like something sacred had finally arrived. Nathan stood beside me, his shoulder brushing mine hands clasped behind his back. He didn't speak, he didn't need to. For the first time, he wasn't ahead of me. We were side by side, equals. Dad was on my other side. His hand calloused and rough found mine. He didn't squeeze, just held it, steady, like an anchor. When I glanced over, I saw it. His eyes glistened, the lines around them deeper than I remembered. He'd always been the statue in the house, but right then, he looked like a man watching a missing piece click into place. "You came home," he whispered, not with pride, with relief and regret. I nodded too, full to answer. Then Mum stepped forward, not stiff, not performative, just a mother who had learned what silence costs. She wrapped her arms around me, pulled me close. Her breath was warm against my cheek. "I'm sorry, I never asked how you survived," she said, voice trembling. I was too afraid of what the answer might be. I didn't pull away. I let her hold me. I let myself be held. That's when I felt a small tug at my sleeve. I looked down. A girl, maybe 9, 10 at most, stood there with a bouquet in hand, lavender flowers soft and trembling like her grip. She wore a tiny backpack with a Velcro patch that read, "Future Hero." Her eyes were wide but not afraid, just curious, hopeful. She held the bouquet up to me. "My aunt says you saved people in a place with no name," she said shyly. "I want to be like you, brave, even if nobody knows my name." My throat tightened. I knelt, took the bouquet gently, and smiled, not the kind you give for the cameras, but the kind that carries history in its breath. "You don't have to be known," I said softly. "You just have to know who you are. The rest," I looked up at the wall, then back to her. "The rest is noise." She nodded solemnly the way only kids do when they understand more than they should. Then she walked back to her seat shoes. 2 big dreams, even bigger. As the crowd filtered out, I stayed back. One last moment, just me and the wall. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the red wire loop, the same one I'd taken from the bomb in Yemen. The same one that nearly wrote the end of my story. I held it in my palm, feeling its weight, not as threat, but as thread. A thread that had stitched together silence, memory rage, and finally truth. I closed my fingers around it, turned to the exit, and walked out into the sunlight. No longer erased, no longer quiet, not invisible, just real. Seen. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is return to a place that once forgot you and choose not to forget yourself. Not everyone will understand the weight you carry or the silence you've survived, but your story still matters. Even if no one claps, even if no one frames it, even if your name never makes it to the wall, you matter. And if you've ever felt like Sophia, like a ghost at your own table, a stranger in your own family, know this, you're not alone. There's space for your voice here, for your scars, for your strength, and for the truth only you can tell. If this story moved something in you, hit that subscribe button. Not for the algorithm, but for every invisible soul who deserves to be seen. Drop your stories in the comments. I'm listening.